I thought you said your son was bright, Dolores. The words cut through the room like a cold wind. Mrs. Whitmore's voice was smooth, almost gentle, like she didn't realize the sting behind her smile. Her pearl necklace rested just above the collar of her cashmere sweater, perfectly still, like everything else in the room. Ethan sat across from her at the chessboard, 12 years old, quiet, still. His shoes were worn. His hoodie was too big. His eyes, calm, watching everything. In the corner, a few women chuckled politely, their laughter light but sharp. Dolores stood near the wall, her hands clasped in front of her apron. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't frown. He looked at the pieces on the board. Slowly, carefully, he made his first move. Mrs. Whitmore raised an eyebrow, then moved a piece of her own. Another move from Ethan, then another. And with each quiet play, the room began to change. The chuckles faded. The glances grew longer. Even Mrs. Whitmore's smile started to slip. They thought this was a game. They thought he was just a child. They thought wrong. If you feel something stirring in your heart, stay with us. And if you want to hear more stories like this, please like the video and hit that subscribe button. And feel free to leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Long before the chessboard, long before the stares and the smirks, there was a small apartment on the edge of Brookhaven, an old neighborhood just outside Atlanta. The walls were thin, the floor creaked, and the heater worked when it felt like it. But it was home. Ethan liked quiet. He never minded that they didn't have much. He found peace in the way sunlight hit the kitchen table in the mornings, the smell of his mom's coffee, the soft rustle of pages turning in the books he read over and over again. Dolores worked 6 days a week. She left before sunrise, walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, and rode across town to clean houses far grander than her own. Some days she came home with sore feet and aching hands, but she always smiled when she walked through that door and saw Ethan, curled up in the corner with a book or a puzzle. Ethan had always been different. He didn't talk much, but he noticed things. He could remember tiny details, where his mom left her keys, the names of every neighbor on their street, the pattern of tiles on the grocery store floor. When he was 5, he solved a jigsaw puzzle meant for teenagers. When he was 7, he could recite entire pages of books after reading them once. Dolores never bragged. She never posted online or told the ladies at the bus stop. She just watched her son grow, one quiet miracle at a time. Every night, after dinner, she would sit with him at the kitchen table, no TV, no distractions. Just them. Sometimes they'd go over homework. Other times she'd let him teach her. One evening, when he was 9, Ethan pulled a dusty old chessboard from a donation box at the church down the street. He'd never played before, never seen anyone play, but the carved pieces spoke to him. He brought it home, set it on the table, and started to teach himself. Dolores watched from the doorway, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. You know how that game works, baby? Ethan didn't look up. He was staring at the pieces like they were alive. Not yet, he said, but I will. From that night on, chess became a part of their world. He studied online when the Wi-Fi worked, borrowed books from the library, made notes in a worn spiral notebook he carried everywhere. The game was more than just moves to him, it was rhythm, space, patience. And every single night, he played against himself. Dolores never understood the rules, but she understood why it mattered. In a world that didn't always see her son, chess gave him something that did. She saved up to buy him a real set for his birthday. He cried when he opened it. Quiet tears. No words. Just a long, tight hug that said more than anything else ever could. At school, Ethan was always the kid in the back. Teachers liked him because he never caused trouble. Other kids left him alone because he didn't chase attention. He wasn't trying to fit in. He was just trying to figure things out. Sometimes Dolores worried he was too alone. But then she'd see him walking to the library with that chessboard tucked under his arm, or hear him humming while solving puzzles at the kitchen table. And she knew he wasn't lonely. He was focused. He was building something no one could see yet. Not the kids at school. Not the teachers. Not even her. But it was there. In the stillness. In the routine. In the way he took his time with every move. He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't chase praise. He just kept showing up, day after day, doing the quiet work. Until one morning, Dolores came home from work holding an envelope in her hand. Mrs. Whitmore, her employer, had invited her and Ethan to the house that Saturday. She called it a casual get-together. A few ladies, some snacks, and a little chess on the patio. Dolores felt something twist in her stomach. This wasn't a normal invitation. In 11 years, Mrs. Whitmore had never even asked her to stay for lunch. But Ethan, standing behind her, looked at the envelope, then at her. He didn't say a word, just nodded. That Saturday they got on the bus together. He wore his cleanest shirt. She carried her quiet hope. Neither of them said it out loud, but deep down they both knew this day was going to mean something. One way or another. Back in the sun-soaked parlor, the pieces had barely begun to move, but the judgment in the room was already loud, even without a word being spoken. Ethan sat straight, eyes on the board. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't looking around for approval. He wasn't even blinking much. Just watching, thinking. Mrs. Whitmore leaned forward and made her next move. Her perfectly polished nails tapping the rook with a little too much flair. She wasn't playing to enjoy the game. She was playing to prove something. "Your turn, champ," she said. Her tone was cheerful, but underneath it was something else, something sharp. From the corner of the room, a woman in a green dress whispered behind her teacup. "He's cute," she said, probably just pretending to understand. "Look at how serious he looks." More laughter. Light, polite, but not kind. Ethan didn't flinch. He placed his knight down with quiet precision. The older man standing beside Mrs. Whitmore stepped closer to the table. His name was Mr. Elliot. Everyone in the room knew him, the kind of man who filled a space without raising his voice. Wealthy, confident, a former investment banker turned chess hobbyist. "Now this should be fun," he said with a grin, sliding into the seat beside Mrs. Whitmore. "Mind if I take over for a bit?" Mrs. Whitmore smiled wide. "Be my guest. Let's see what the boys really got." Dolores, still standing quietly near the hallway, took one small step closer. Her hands were tightly folded, her knuckles white. Mr. Elliot adjusted the board slightly, like Ethan might have set it up wrong. Then he looked across the table. "All right, young man," he said, voice full of charm. "You ready to learn a thing or two today?" Ethan nodded once. No smile, no nerves, just calm. He moved his bishop. A small, sharp play. Clean. Unexpected. Mr. Elliot blinked, then smirked. Lucky guess. He made his move. Ethan responded instantly. The pieces danced quickly now, each one like a quiet question, answered with certainty. The room, once buzzing with small talk, was beginning to fall quiet. The women leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore narrowed her eyes. Mr. Elliot was frowning now. Not angry, just confused. Dolores caught her breath. She'd seen that look before in math teachers, in guidance counselors, in people who assumed her son was only ever going to be average. Mr. Elliot leaned back in his chair. "Who taught you how to play?" he asked. Ethan looked up, finally meeting the man's eyes. "I taught myself." A few people chuckled, thinking it was a joke. But his face didn't change. He wasn't bragging. He wasn't trying to impress. He was just telling the truth. Mr. Elliot glanced back down at the board, then hesitated, just long enough for the room to notice. He made his next move. A strong one. Safe. Ethan studied it for a moment, then moved his queen in silence. Gasps echoed softly. The trap was clean. Brilliant even. Not flashy. Not arrogant. Just perfect. Mrs. Whitmore sat up straighter. The women stopped pretending to sip their tea. Someone whispered, "Did he just?" Mr. Elliot's fingers tapped against the side of the table. He was quiet now, focused, but it was too late. The boy wasn't guessing. He wasn't bluffing. He was winning. Dolores felt tears rise behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. The game continued, but the tone had shifted. The power in the room was no longer where it used to be. Ethan didn't change. Still calm, still kind, still quiet. He wasn't playing for attention. He wasn't playing for applause. He was playing the way he had every night for years, like it mattered, like it meant something, because to him, it did. The room was silent now. Not polite silence, stunned silence. Mr. Elliot stared at the chessboard like it had turned into something unfamiliar. His fingers hovered over a piece, then pulled back. Again, and again. Ethan waited, still, calm. He didn't fidget, didn't smirk. He just sat with the same quiet focus he brought to his kitchen table every night. The hum of soft music from the house speakers had faded into the background. Even the women with their teacups had stopped whispering. They were all watching now. Not just a boy, not just the maid's son. They were watching a player, a force. Mr. Elliot finally moved a pawn forward, more out of desperation than design. Ethan's eyes traced the lines. His fingers floated above the board, then settled with complete confidence. He castled. Smooth, sharp, unexpected. And suddenly it was clear he had been planning this. Every move from the start had been a quiet thread weaving toward this very moment. Mrs. Whitmore leaned in, brows tight. "What just happened?" she asked. Mr. Elliot exhaled hard through his nose. "He just reversed pressure and opened the king's file. That's..." He didn't finish the sentence. Ethan said nothing. Mr. Elliot moved again, this time quicker, like speed would shake something loose. But Ethan responded within seconds, cutting off space, tightening control. The board was shrinking for Mr. Elliot. Every square looked like a closing door. One of the women whispered, "Is this kid really beating Elliot?" Another answered, "This isn't just winning. This is strategy." Mrs. Whitmore looked over at Dolores, who was still standing silently by the hallway arch. Her eyes were wide now, her mouth just slightly open. She looked at Ethan like she was seeing him. For the first time, Dolores didn't say a word. She just stood a little taller. Back at the board, Mr. Elliot's voice cracked the silence. "You study with a coach?" Ethan shook his head. "No, sir." "Club?" "No, sir." "So where did you learn this?" Ethan looked at the pieces, then looked back up. "I just like how the game thinks." Mr. Elliot swallowed hard. He could feel it. The inevitability. The boy wasn't chasing a win. He was closing in with quiet, surgical precision. Ethan's queen slid across the board. Clean. Lethal. Mr. Elliot's king was exposed. The next move would be check. One more after that. Mate. He stared at the board, then leaned back in his chair. "I resign," he said. The words hung heavy in the air. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was deeper, heavier. Mrs. Whitmore blinked, like waking from a dream. "You beat Elliot," she said under her breath. The women around the room looked at each other, then at Ethan. Their posture changed. Their faces softened. For the first time, they really saw him. Not a charity guest. Not a novelty. A boy with brilliance they hadn't even imagined. Ethan stood slowly, respectfully. "Thank you for the game, sir," he said, offering his hand. Mr. Elliot stared at it for a second, then shook it. "You're something else, kid," he said. "Really?" Ethan nodded once, then walked over to his mother. Dolores didn't say anything right away. She just reached out and brushed a bit of lint from his shoulder, her fingers gentle. Then, with a quiet voice only he could hear, "I'm proud of you." He smiled, small and real. "I know." As they turned to leave, Mrs. Whitmore stood abruptly. "Wait, Dolores, Ethan, please." She paused, searching for something to say. Ethan turned back, polite. Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward, voice softer now. "That was extraordinary." Dolores gave a small smile. "He's been extraordinary for a long time." And with that they walked out, past the silver-framed photos, past the polished floors, past the room that had once doubted, mocked, and underestimated. They didn't need applause. They didn't need invitations. They had already won something bigger. Dignity, respect, truth. Ethan didn't speak much on the way home. He never did. But that night, he set up the board on their kitchen table just like always. And this time, Dolores sat down across from him. "I don't know how to play," she said with a laugh. "That's okay," Ethan said, setting the pieces. "I'll teach you." After Ethan and Dolores walked away from the table, the room didn't snap back to normal. There was no laughter, no gossip, no smug comments passed between teacups. Just quiet. Mrs. Whitmore stood frozen by the chessboard, one hand still holding her empty glass like she'd forgotten it was there. The women around her avoided eye contact, all of them replaying the game in their heads, trying to find the moment, the move where things turned where they should have known. Mr. Elliot slowly reached down and began resetting the pieces on the board. His movements were slower now, less sure. He wasn't trying to reclaim control. He was just thinking. "You okay?" one of the women asked him softly. He gave a faint smile and nodded. "That boy," he said almost to himself. "He's playing at a level most grown men never reach. That wasn't luck. That was knowledge, patience, vision." He looked up at Mrs. Whitmore. "Where'd you find him again?" Mrs. Whitmore didn't answer right away. She just stared toward the hallway Ethan had walked down. "Dolores's son," she finally said, quiet, almost regretful. One of the guests, a younger woman with short curls and a notepad in her purse, spoke up from the corner. "Do you think he'd teach my nephew? He's been trying to learn chess, but he just doesn't focus." Mr. Elliot chuckled. "If that boy agrees to teach, your nephew better pay attention." That was some of the cleanest endgame I've ever seen. There were nods now. Small, slow, honest. The pride in the room had melted into something different. Something softer. Curiosity. Admiration. Respect. Not because Ethan demanded it. Not because he showed off. But because he earned it. Outside, the sky had begun to shift from bright blue to soft gold. The sun dipped low over the neighborhood trees as Ethan and Dolores waited at the bus stop. Dolores held her purse on her lap, one hand resting over the other. She didn't say much, she never needed to. But every few seconds, she'd glance sideways at her son. And every time she saw the same thing, calm, not proud, not overwhelmed, just steady. Ethan had taken everything they'd thrown at him, and never once changed who he was. "You did good today," she said finally. Ethan didn't look up. "Thank you." After a pause, he added, "I didn't think they'd laugh." Dolores took a deep breath. People laugh when they don't understand. It's easier than admitting they're wrong. Ethan nodded. He didn't seem angry, just thoughtful. Back at the Whitmore house, Mrs. Whitmore stood alone near the window, watching the bus pull away down the block. She turned to Mr. Elliot. "Do you think he'd come back? Play again?" Mr. Elliot gave a slow shrug. "I don't know. But if he does, I wouldn't sit across from him unless you're ready to lose." Mrs. Whitmore gave a faint smile. "I wasn't ready for him to win." She looked down at her manicured hands. "I thought I was inviting a child to entertain the room. And instead we all got taught a lesson." From the hallway, the younger woman with the notepad stepped forward. "If you don't mind, I'd like to get in touch with Dolores. I have a friend who works with school programs, gifted youth. Ethan might qualify." Mrs. Whitmore blinked. "Oh, I suppose we could ask her." "Yes." Her voice had lost its usual lilt. She was thinking now, really thinking. The bus rocked gently as it moved through the city. Ethan rested his head against the window, eyes following the blur of trees and lights and homes. Dolores reached into her purse and pulled out a granola bar. She held it out to him without a word. He took it, unwrapped it slowly, and broke it in half, handing the other piece to her. They sat in silence. The good kind. And then, softly, "You think they'll treat us different now?" he asked. Dolores smiled, not bitter, just knowing. "Maybe," she said, "but that's not why you played." Ethan looked down at his hands, the soft rub of his thumb against his palm. A habit he had. When thinking. No, he said. It's not. He looked at her. I just wanted to do it right. Dolores reached over and touched his shoulder. You did. Back in the Whitmore living room, the chessboard sat still, set, but untouched. The pieces waited. No one else dared sit in Ethan's chair. 3 weeks passed. The sun fell softer over Brookhaven now. Spring had settled in, and with it came something new, quiet change, like fresh paint drying on old wood. In the corner of the local library, at a long wooden table with a view of the park, Ethan sat, surrounded by 5 kids, some younger than him, 1 or 2 the same age, each one with a chessboard in front of them. Their eyes followed his every move. Their brows furrowed when he paused. Their hands mimicked the way he held his pieces, gentle, precise. He wasn't loud. He didn't give speeches or point fingers. He just showed them. Think before you move, he said softly. Ask the board what it's trying to tell you. One little boy squinted at his knight. What if I don't understand? Ethan gave a quiet smile. Then you sit with it. You wait. It'll make sense if you listen long enough. From behind the bookshelf, Dolores watched. Her eyes shone with quiet joy. She was still, wearing her work shoes, her apron folded in her bag. She came straight after her shift every Wednesday just to see this. Her son teaching, leading. What began as a single game in a stranger's home had become something so much bigger. After that day at the Whitmore estate, word had spread. Small, fast, and wide. Ethan's story reached a retired principal who now ran the after-school programs. A chess coach from a local high school asked to meet him. A small write-up in the community paper called him the quiet strategist. And for the first time in his life, people were calling his name not to correct him, but to learn from him. Mr. Elliot showed up to one of the library sessions. Not to play, just to watch. He stood in the back, arms crossed, smiling gently as Ethan showed a girl how to control the center of the board. You ever think about competition? He asked Ethan afterward. Rated tournaments. Maybe even a scholarship one day. Ethan shrugged. Not out of disinterest, but peace. I like the quiet ones. The ones who just want to learn. Mr. Elliot smiled wider. That's what makes you dangerous on the board, kid. You're not chasing trophies. Later that week, Mrs. Whitmore sent a handwritten letter. It was short, careful, and sincere. Dolores, I thought a lot about that afternoon. I was wrong, not just about your son, but about what I thought mattered. Please know how deeply I regret it. If Ethan is ever open to it, I'd love to support his path in any way I can. The world needs more boys like him. With respect, Carol Whitmore. Dolores folded the letter gently and placed it inside her keepsake box, between Ethan's first drawing and the photo of him holding his first chessboard. She didn't show him the letter right away. Some things could wait. Every Wednesday now, Ethan came to the library. Rain or shine, he brought extra boards, extra pencils, an old notebook filled with diagrams and scribbles and questions he'd once asked himself. The kids kept coming. A boy with ADHD who couldn't sit still for math sat quiet for 40 straight minutes across from Ethan. A girl who never raised her hand in school won her first game and smiled so wide her braces gleamed. A shy 4th grader started writing her own strategy notes because Ethan did. They weren't just learning chess. They were learning focus, patience, confidence, the kind that builds slow but never breaks. And Ethan? He hadn't changed. He still came home, dropped his backpack and set the board on the kitchen table. He still played quietly, still studied, still got that soft wrinkle in his brow when thinking 3 moves ahead. Only now, when he looked up, there were people watching, not judging, not mocking, just seeing him. For real. Dolores sat across from him more often now. She still didn't know the rules, not all of them. But she tried. Teach me that move again, she'd say, pointing at the knight. He'd smile. L shape, 2 forward, 1 to the side. Or 1 forward, 2 to the side. She'd nod. Then forget. Then ask again. And he'd teach her. Again. One evening, as the sun dipped low outside their window, painting the apartment walls in amber light, Dolores reached across the board and moved a piece. Ethan blinked, surprised. "That's the first time you didn't ask," he said. Dolores grinned. "I've been paying attention." He looked at her move. "Solid. Smart. You've been listening to the board," he said. Dolores smiled wider. "Well, I had a pretty good teacher." They sat like that for a while, 2 chairs, 1 board, and 100 quiet memories between them. No applause. No crowd. Just peace. The kind that comes when you've been seen, when you've stayed true, when you've earned your place by being exactly who you are. Have you ever been overlooked? Have you ever walked into a room where people had already decided who you were before you said a single word? It's a hard feeling. That quiet weight of being underestimated, of having to prove yourself again and again just to be seen. But maybe, like Ethan, you didn't raise your voice. Maybe you stayed steady, stayed kind. Maybe you let your actions speak louder than anything else. Because strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it listens, learns, waits for the right moment, and then moves with purpose. Ethan wasn't the loudest in the room, but he changed it just by being true to who he was. And maybe that's what someone out there needs to hear today. That quiet can be powerful. That kindness isn't weakness. And that just because they don't see your light yet, doesn't mean you aren't already shining. If the story touched you, if you saw even a piece of yourself in Ethan, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us your story in the comments. Let others know they're not alone. And if you believe in stories that lift, that heal, and that remind us what really matters, subscribe. We've got more to share. Because your voice matters here. Even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones.